Yes? Yes. Well, as part of my research for this historical film, I'd appreciate a good long talk with you, Mr. England. I believe you were the first staff member to be appointed. I see. Well, what about tomorrow morning? 10 o'clock? Fine. Looking forward to it. Goodbye. Are you the only surviving member of the original Queensland Main Roads organisation, Mr. England?
Yes, I was appointed Secretary Accountant in January 1921.
What basic factors led to the establishment of the board?
The motor vehicle had proved itself during World War I, and as car sales increased, mind you, there were only about 9,000 vehicles in Queensland at that time, the need for better roads and more roads became urgent. By 1919, an overall authority for road planning was essential.
The century was barely out of its teens when the Main Roads Board was formed in Brisbane. Traffic volume posed no problems in 1920. It was to be 9 years before the present City Hall would be built on this spot. Even the Treasury building was unfinished, and unrestricted parking existed throughout Brisbane. Peak hour traffic wasn't exactly heavy in country towns either. Whether it be Landsborough, or Innisfail, or Townsville, or anywhere else for that matter. At this time, most Queensland roads were little better than cart tracks. They were barely suitable even for this kind of transport.
The motor vehicle added a new dimension for moving people and produce. It was capable of greater speed and range than animal-drawn transport, and its numbers were fast increasing.
But there was a catch. The traditional water-bound macadam roads broke up quickly under the suction effect of faster-moving rubber tyres. Roads were rough, often narrow, with sharp curves and poor visibility. At that time, they were built and maintained by local authorities throughout the state, while shire councils were well aware of the ever-increasing demand for more and better roads. They just didn't have the money.
Mr. Speaker, this state desperately needs a unified road planning authority, and I wholeheartedly support this move to establish such a board.
In March 1920, the government passed the Main Roads Act. Mr. J.R. Kemp was appointed chairman of the board, and early the following year he was joined by Mr. J.A. Fraser and Mr. D.A. Crawford. A statewide questionnaire quickly showed the board the enormity of its task: to provide a road system for a state bigger than Spain, France, Germany and Italy combined. Railways were providing the main links between country centres, with local roads acting as feeders to railheads. Road bridges were few, and very much the worse for wear. And in many places, there were no bridges at all. The board members inspected the roads of southern, central and northern Queensland. On foot, horseback, by car, and even by steamer. A report was prepared for every road, and planning began. The first two major projects were the Landsborough-Mullaney and Mount Tamborine roads. Their task was far from easy. Equipment was simple, almost primitive. Ploughs, rollers, water carts, tumbling tommies, drays and wagons, all drawn by horse or bullock, made earth moving a slow and cumbersome job. As mechanisation advanced, graders became more complex. Road surfaces were improved by sealing with tar or bitumen.
What's this, Fred?
It's a new 2-horsepower bitumen sprayer. You see, speed of the horses controls thickness of tar.
Any problems?
Yeah, at first, contamination from droppings.
What did you do?
Oh, just fitted the horses with Hessian nappies.
Steam-driven rock crushers gradually superseded manual methods of providing road metal. Solid-tired steam and petrol-driven trucks speeded the movement of road-building materials. Plodding hooves were replaced by wheels and tracks. Steamrollers and traction engines became a fascination for generations of small boys and launched a new era in road building. The first major job in North Queensland was the construction of the Gillies Highway from Gordon Vale to the Atherton Tableland. It followed the original pack horse track that miners had used since the 1880s for bringing out gold and tin. The road had more than 600 curves in 12 miles. In 1922, the board's first bridge over 6 Mile Creek in the Noosa Shire north of Brisbane was thought to be costly at £1,000. Its recent replacement cost $35,000. Beginning with Rockhampton and Cairns, the board progressively opened district offices throughout the state. It's interesting to note that the board's 1923 annual report pointed out the absurdity of building roads with inferior materials. How poor drainage, especially in high rainfall areas, was a real problem. This showed that more research was needed, and that road damage, being caused by overloaded vehicles, required urgent weight of load regulations.
In 1929, after several moves due to expansion, all staff was grouped in this building, which was to be our home for the next 38 years. 4 years earlier, the Act had been amended and the board became the Main Roads Commission, with Mr. Kemp as the first commissioner.
Meanwhile, a central laboratory had been established for testing, standardizing and quality control of materials. Well-designed concrete bridges were being built in the western districts, like these at Thargomindah. And in the southeastern districts, the ferries were being replaced. The Depression years of the early 30s affected everyone. To assist the unemployed, the government launched a relief scheme throughout the state involving road and bridge construction. Coming from all walks of life, these men were widely praised for their high standard of work. What's this Irvine heat treatment machine, Mr. England?
It was a sort of travelling furnace that helped solve the problem of building roads in outback black soil areas. It changed the soil into acceptable road-making material at something like 20 feet per hour. At about this time, drag spreaders were being used in other parts of the world, so we built one ourselves.
Cold mix bitumen applied to old roads by this method quickly brought them up to profile. The smoother finish on the running surface greatly reduced tyre wear. A major step forward took place in 1934 with the introduction of aerial surveying. 55,000 acres of dense jungle in the Culper area of North Queensland was mapped for closer settlement. This was accomplished in 4 days. A ground party would have taken 18 months. To speed up repairs to road-making machinery in the field, the first of many mobile workshop units was designed and built by the mechanical branch and Nunda workshop. These were to prove invaluable during the war.
In Bezug auf das sudetendeutsche Problem meine Geduld jetzt zu Ende ist.
War clouds were gathering as the Forgan Bridge at Mackay was being built. And the completion of an inland defence road from the border to Townsville was being planned. The declaration of war in September 1939 accelerated activity in defence construction. The department built army camps, carried out improvements to existing aerodromes, and built new ones. Work commenced on the defence road between Alice Springs and Burdham.
Of course, with the entry of Japan into the war, our position became even more serious. And in 1942, the main roads virtually became the Allied Works Council. One of the top priority jobs was the construction of a 400-mile east-west road link from Railhead at Mount Isa, this being part of the main army supply route through to Darwin.
And were you directly involved in this?
Yes, I was.
And how were conditions out there?
Well, things were a bit rough at the start. That book will give you some idea of the conditions at that time. There was a rough track in existence when we started, but it was quite inadequate for military use. Plant and supplies all came from the base at Mount Isa. We had open cookhouses and plenty of flies. Water was always scarce.
Always?
Well, most of the time anyway. And when it wasn't mud, it was dust. There were about 700 men on the job, and there were a few rugged types amongst them too. And of course the ever-present flies. On one section we had to cart water more than 100 miles, We got a geologist on the job later on and then put down bores at 10-mile intervals. There would have been, on the average, 1,000 army trucks a day over the road while we were building it. As a matter of fact, they were our best rollers. However, things improved considerably as we got organised, and when the road finally went through, it was ahead of schedule.
How about plant maintenance? Was that a problem?
Well, on the road we had mobile workshops, but in major centres, tremendous expansion had taken place. Of course, there were big jobs in many other areas at this time. Horn Island
of the cooperation and friendly assistance rendered by you and your staff to the United States forces in the difficult years just past.
Back on a peacetime footing, the department returned to its normal work. At Rockhampton, the old Fitzroy Bridge was replaced. At the flood-plagued Burdekin River, between Home Hill and Ayr, work began on the substructure for a new road and rail bridge. Another step forward, the first line marking machines appeared to play their part in improving safety on the road. The Commission's vigorous leader for 30 years, Mr. J.R. Kemp, retired in 1949 and was knighted 2 years later. Chief Engineer Mr. D.A. Crawford became Commissioner. The early 50s saw the Callide coal fields linked to the port of Gladstone. Construction of the Brisbane to Ipswich 4-lane highway and the establishment of nurseries to grow shrubs and trees for roadside beautification. In 1951, the Commission became the Main Roads Department. Post-war scarcity of road building plant led to improvisation of many items of equipment, including this travelling road factory, which mixed spread material with bitumen ready for rolling. Then, in 1953, Mr. Crawford retired. Mr. A.R. Williams became Commissioner, and the department's development continued. Road and bridge construction rapidly increased during the 50s, but the average motorist was possibly more aware of such innovations as new type number plates, route numbering, and signposting. To cope with general expansion, planning of a new Brisbane head office began. After 32 years' service, the last 6 as Commissioner, Mr. A.R. Williams retired in 1959 and was followed by Mr. C.N. Barton. Under his inspired leadership, organisational skill and appreciation of changing world trends in transportation requirements, the foundation of a progressive main roads policy was firmly established. The search for faster road building techniques continued. This cement stabilisation equipment dug up the road, added cement, then water. Mixing and rolling preceded bitumen surfacing. With the full cooperation of local authorities, a critical assessment of every state road led to the Road Plan for Queensland being launched in July 1963, under which state highways, main, developmental and secondary roads were planned to serve every region of the state. 1963 also saw the linking of the Bruce Highway from Coolangatta to Cairns. Incorporated in the Queensland road network is a portion of the Commonwealth Beef Road scheme. By 1970, nearly half the 2,500-mile state total had been completed. These all-weather roads allow rapid transport of livestock. They also serve the needs of commerce, the tourist and the private motorist. At the other end of the state, construction of the 15-storey head office building was begun in 1965. Due to continual growth, many sections of the department had again become scattered, and the pressing need was to regroup these under one roof. In September 1967, 1,400 staff occupied the new building, the largest office block in Queensland at that time. The department's computer became the nerve centre, providing services for road and bridge design, statistical reports, motor vehicle registration, the assessment of mechanical equipment needs, and many other services. The department's enthusiasm for rest areas grew perhaps from here, and the need for weighbridge stations certainly came from this. On the Gold Coast at Surfers Paradise, a smart electronic brain controls the traffic flow. This is the first computer control of traffic in Australia. From modern divisional and district offices, the department has direct control over some 25,000 miles of roading within the state. Each district controls the planning, construction and maintenance of roads within its area. Materials used in road and bridge construction are the subject of constant research and quality control. The modern laboratories at Hurston and district and project offices supported by mobile field units provide this service. In common with most large cities, time lost through traffic congestion was becoming a major problem in Brisbane. The Wilbur-Smith traffic study, completed in 1965, recommended a 4-stage city road plan of freeways and expressways to cost an estimated $350 million. The state government approved a modified Stage 1 comprising 5 major projects at an estimated cost of $27.6 million. In 1969, Mr. H.A. Lowe was appointed Commissioner, succeeding Mr. Barton. In May 1970, the completed Story Bridge Expressway section was opened by the Main Roads Minister, Mr. Cam. And that just about brings our story up to date, Mr. Lowe. Is there anything you'd like to add?
I think it's a most interesting presentation. and should give a quite exciting picture of the department's development. But of course, the whole history of the department has not yet been written. As I see it, the department faces a task which in some ways is as demanding as it was 50 years ago, but with this difference. We enter the second 50 years with a technical and administrative staff highly qualified, well trained and equipped to meet the challenge of the future. A challenge which will show itself in the